If I really told the truth, I would say he was one of the most wonderful men on earth.
He just meant the world to me. He was just someone you really look up to, but he also made you believe in yourself and have confidence and that you can achieve what he has achieved. He was just that kind of a brother.
Bob Rice was a phenomenal person. Kind, generous. When you talked to him, it was, you knew you were getting the real thing.
Even with all of his successes in life, he still remained grounded.
It was hard to believe that he was as successful as he was by the way he interacted with people on a day-to-day basis.
Been around a lot of CEOs, a lot of people that have done well, and Bob's the best I've ever seen. And not just because he is my brother, he just had it together.
Bob and Joyce Rice are some of the most special people I've ever known in my life.
He was a really good student of life. He very seldom would make the same mistake over.
There's just no one that can replace him.
I learned from my dad that putting your family and putting the Lord first in your life makes everything else just fall into place. He grew up on a farm in Farmington, Utah. He had 2 brothers and 2 sisters, and a mom and dad.
Bob was born in the Depression year in 1929. We have a lot the same background, Bob and I do. We both were raised on poor farms. I was born in Idaho, and I'm 10th of 11 children. All of us children were born on our kitchen table, every one of us. Leonard was Bob's younger brother who was my age, and I got to know him before I ever got to meet Bob. They had Denise, Bob, Leonard, Chloe, and Brent. When you look at the little rock home that the family grew up in, you can tell that it was meager.
And that's Mom and Dad. We always knew the folks loved us, that's for sure. Money, that was pretty hard to come by.
LeGrande's father and mother had this big farm, and Gans ran the farm. They had milk cows, and they had a milk barn. And so Bob and Leonard would have to go milk those cows with their dad twice a day.
He'd talk often about how hard it was. I think being the oldest son, it really fell on him to do a lot of the chores.
It was tending to the orchards, tending to the hay fields, tending to the milk cows. And so it was a pretty hard
farm life that they grew up.
I'd overhear a lot of things from my mom talking to her sisters, but she was so proud of Bob. But I worry about him. He just works too hard.
His mom was a wonderful mother and provider for the family, but again, they had very, very limited resources. There were times when he would go to bed without eating anything. As the family got older and there wasn't room in the house for him to be with his brother in the small house they lived in, he and his brother lived in a cellar that was around back. They'd have to go outside and go down into this root cellar that had no finished walls, a dirt floor, and that's where they slept every night. There's a lot of nights when there were mice and rats, and there were even snakes down there with them.
It was a real good learning experience for him to have that poverty and lack in his life, because he was bound and determined he wasn't going to live like that ever again.
My dad was really motivated to not be poor.
That upbringing just had a lot to do with what he became.
From what I'd gathered in our family, only rich kids got to go to the university. And so that wasn't even where we'd head at all.
None of the family, none of the siblings had ever gone to college.
He went to high school, and he was quite proud that he graduated from seminary. He just had to get to work, you know.
My mom and dad met at a West High, Davis High football game.
The night of that game was when I first saw Bob and first met him.
And that was the first time that he really recognized my mom and thought, boy, she's great.
He's 3 years older than I am, and he had a car.
He is working as a mechanic, he called it a grease monkey, at Hillfield Air Force Base. And he thought at that time that he was away from the farm, that he had a job that paid a steady income, and he had kind of arrived.
We started dating at that time, and I still had a year to go in high school. But he was ready to get married.
My dad pursued her, and she sounded like she was kind of not into him as much as he was into her at the beginning. Just when he was around Joyce, he just lit up. And then when she was gone, he just, oh boy, you know. And I thought, man, he really likes her.
He really fell for Mom. They didn't date long before he wanted to go steady, and he gave her a ring.
He gave me my diamond ring. We got engaged. I was 17, and Bob was 20. In the springtime, there was one of the big proms at high school. And this really good-looking young man and a good dancer said to me, what are you doing with that ring on your finger? He says, don't you know how much living there is for you to do, you know? And why don't you give that back and then go to this prom with me? And I thought, oh, that would be fun. And so I did give the ring back.
And that probably totally crushed him. I didn't really get the side of the story from him, but I assume that probably just really did not go over well with him.
I went to the dance. It wasn't as great as I thought it was going to be. My friend said to me, are you out of your mind? She said, you will never meet a guy that's as good as Bob Rice, ever. Bob had a date with this old girlfriend. And about a block away from their house, after he tells her goodnight, I ran up to the car and he was so glad to see me. My kids all say, especially the boys, he was crazy to give you the time of day. We just had a little home wedding, and my bishop was the one that performed our marriage.
She didn't finish high school. She had to quit school and go to work when they got married.
They started basically with nothing, and from the honeymoon on. My dad was a pretty shy person by nature, and he maybe didn't excel in some sports and those kind of things.
He was quite small and slight, didn't have much muscle on his frame.
He really did have an inferior complex about his size and everything.
A friend invited him to go and do some weightlifting, and he went along, and from the time he was first exposed to that, he just loved it.
And the word was that he just put on, I mean, he'd always say that he put on 50 or 60 pounds of muscle within a year.
He could see himself getting stronger and getting bigger, and as a result of that, getting more confidence in himself.
Fitness and him starting to work out really made a change in his life.
That led to him getting involved, and he went to his first Mr. Utah contest. And for 3 or 4 years, he was in that competition every year. He would take third and then second a couple times. Finally, in '54, he was Mr. Utah.
People who are disciplined enough to become a bodybuilder are a different breed.
Bob was obviously very into fitness and very into nutrition. Because I saw the pictures of Bob back in the day, and he was ripped. I mean, he was a guy that could have been in Joe Weider's Muscle and Fitness magazine.
That was the beginning. That helped him overcome his, I guess, the bulliness.
That's really what kicked him in or jump-started him into his whole life's career. That's what got him interested in the gym, in Lausanne's gym on 5th South and Main.
He got a couple partners, Fred Sessions and Pete Peterson, and the three of them, from what I gather, borrowed money from Associates Finance, $3,000, and he bought the gym.
He had a job at Hill Air Force Base, and not only his father-in-law thought he was nuts, but then a lot of his buddies thought he was just crazy to leave that kind of thing and pursue this dream.
Mortgaged our furniture and everything that we had.
He mortgaged the dishes and everything else in the house, you know, just to be a part of that gym.
I just totally trusted him. And I thought, this guy is so excited about this business and wants to get into it so bad that I'm sure not going to stand in his way.
I'd been bullied, and Mom says, we're taking you up there. Bob's going to toughen you up. And he did. 2 lefts and a right, and get tougher and tougher, you know. And I thought, oh man, my brother owns this place. But he struggled keeping that place open. You know, there's only so many protein pills you could sell and so on. And so as a side thing he did was wrestling.
Back in those days, you know, wrestling and bodybuilding were kind of all a little bit in the same.
We went to a staged, Mom and Dad didn't know it was staged, and Fred Sessions was his tag team partner, and they were to wrestle Man Mountain Dean and Cap McCann, and we were sitting right on the front row. Boy, this Cap McCann, he was throwing Bob all over the place, and Man Mountain Dean slammed Fred down right in front of us, and the wind just went right out of him. And we just thought, this is way out of control, and they're getting beat up.
My grandfather wasn't too happy about all this playing out, and so he got up on the ring, and my dad had to kind of hold him back.
And so Dad, he's over there, and he says, I just can't take this anymore. And he got up and got a folding chair and started to climb into the ring. And Bob ran over and said, oh, Dad, no, Dad. He's just roughing me up, but he'll kill you. Now, don't come in here.
After a year or so, he had a couple of those partners fall out. They got disenchanted with it and decided they didn't want to do it anymore, but he stuck with it.
Ray Wilson came along, and he had worked for Arthur Murray, and Arthur Murray sold memberships. And he's a young, real good-looking guy and pretty good way with the words, quite a salesman. And he tells Bob, hey, this business can make a lot of money if you start selling memberships instead of protein pills. And break out of, boxing and that kind of thing.
He decided to partner with him, and he loaded up his family with a U-Haul, and we all headed to Dallas, Texas, and that's where he started with Ray Wilson in getting these gyms going.
And that was the start of American Health Studios. And then they started putting them in all over the country.
We spent a certain amount of time in Dallas, in Los Angeles, in Houston, and in Phoenix.
Bob always, he got my sister, my two sisters, my brother Leonard. I mean, he got a job for every relative that he could.
His father was the maintenance arm of the business.
They were young guys. They knew how to make money, but they didn't know the accounting side. They didn't know about profit and loss statements. They just saw the bank accounts. They didn't realize that they had to pay tax on this money.
They borrowed $200,000 to try and keep things together, and Bob signed on it personally.
It didn't take long for them to get through that money. I mean, in other words, they went through that money in a couple of months, and that, hey, we need either more money or, it doesn't look good for us.
This business was growing, but the cash was in short supply. American Health ended up going bankrupt.
That was at the time when everything kind of fell apart for Bob's business.
I know when it happened, quite a few cars got repossessed because my sister Chloe, we were going to go somewhere, Mom and I and Chloe, and we went out and somebody has stolen the car.
In the early years, my dad was so focused on his work that he really was concentrating on that.
I seldom remember him when I was, when I was a year, 2 years old, and on through to my 6 years old.
He was always gone, always somewhere else.
He was so busy working and trying to keep that company alive, American Health Studios alive, that he just was not around.
And being back in the late 50s and early 60s, the man takes care of the outside of the home and the woman takes care of the inside. But I think it was very stressful on my mother.
There's a lot of work that fell upon her shoulders, raising us kids. Mom tells the story about how she, of course, had that nervous breakdown, and it was really, she believes it was related to Dad probably not giving her enough attention, being around enough.
In that day, you never heard of postpartum. About the only treatment that they could give you was shock treatments. Well, I had 27 of them. To me, they were so scary that they did more harm than good. My sister took Bobby and took care of her, and I was in that hospital from June until November. and they were ready to send me to Provo. I just didn't want to live. I just thought no one cared for me, and so I jumped in that river, and I thought, this isn't the way I want to go. I found out through all of that, I didn't want to take my own life. It was a terrible thing to do. I had to learn how much Bob appreciated me and loved me, and this doctor really kind of got on him because he was paying so much attention to what he was doing, and I was kind of shut out. He said, "You guys really need to start appreciating your marriage, and it isn't just Joyce who is into this marriage, it's you too." And so Bob really, that's when he really became a great husband and father. Thank the Lord that it happened early on so that we both could change and realize that we needed to pay more attention to our marriage. And Bob was a big part of me getting well from that. We knew that Bob was good enough at what he did, that he would reorganize and be able to put things back together.
He learned some vital lessons in business, not only in the fitness business, but overall business. I think when you fail, you hopefully come back. A lot of guys don't. And he could have probably packed up his tin and gone back and listened to his father-in-law and gone back and worked, at Hill Air Force Base or something like that.
I think he saw that that could be successful. I think each failure taught him, things to do, things not to do. But he was so driven and so convinced that the health club industry was something that he could be successful at.
Bob came back because he had borrowed money to try to help American Health, but I later on heard him say it was just throwing it down the drain.
Learned a big lesson then because he had a loan out for $200,000. And back then, that would have been like probably several $1 million.
So he went back to Salt Lake attempting to get that club going and try to pay back that money he had borrowed. And I think that's kind of what got him going again.
He over time paid that money back.
He told me he paid back every dime.
He did pay it all off.
It was something that my dad had great integrity his entire business life of making sure that his debts were always paid.
And he always talked about, just preached about debt. He says, debt is like an 800-pound gorilla, and it's gonna grab you, and it will be the end of you.
Bob was all about positive attitude. If you work hard, you have a positive attitude, things are gonna work out for you.
He just was so tough and was so disciplined in his mind that he would just make it happen.
They had stubbed their toes enough, and they knew what not to do to help them on what to do.
We'd heard that he's gonna build a big club on Highland Drive, and it's gonna be called a spa, and steam room, eucalyptus, swimming pool, all that. And then he did.
The first main location in Salt Lake City was in Sugar House.
Boy, when he opened that up down on Highland Drive, it was really something.
It was the first of its kind.
Wow, it was something else in Salt Lake.
Basically, they hit the formula just right.
This was the first high-end, beautiful facility that was built. It really captured people's attention. Red carpet, chrome equipment, cold plunge with ice that dropped into the pool. It had a real great visual effect. And these old guys would go and get in that cold water and love it.
No one was doing what they were doing. Basically taking the old gym atmosphere and taking whirlpools, spas, combining those things with carpet and chandeliers.
The restaurant, the barber shop.
It was just for everybody. You could lift weights there, you could play pool there, you could play ping pong there.
People loved coming to European.
It was the best place in town.
They'd have a bar and they'd have a tiger up in a glass cage up behind the bar. And this tiger's roaming around. I mean, that's how elaborate these spas got.
European Spa and Racket Centers have a new location in Hillsboro, and to celebrate, we're offering 6 full weeks of fitness for just $20, and half the proceeds go to Easter Seals. European Spa and Racket Centers offer racquetball, aerobic dance classes, swimming pool, Nautilus exercise equipment, plus individualized instruction from qualified instructors. 6 full weeks for only $20 to welcome our new Hillsboro location.
With European Health Spa, looking good today.
Call 222-2000 for the location near.
European Health Spa grew to be the largest health club chain in the country and in the world.
Bob put everything together and was so successful with European Health.
There was 110 locations, as I recall, and they were all over the United States.
He often, work hard and have a positive attitude, So when some of his visions started coming to pass, we were like, wow, it really works. We can get out of this poverty.
He was the face of the industry, and I don't know if he knew it or if it's just who he was, but he was always a gentleman, always pleasant, would always take time for you. And I think those qualities that were instilled in him were a major part of his success.
Boy, I'll tell you, he never let the ego get in the way at all. That was pretty amazing. It didn't really seem to affect him. He's still the same.
You never felt like Bob was full of himself or patted himself on the back.
When Bob would come in to see you, a lot of CEOs, they just mingle with the people that are in charge, the regional managers, the vice president, or this or that. Not Bob. So he comes in, and for a whole hour, he is out there talking to the employees and to the members and some of the brand new employees for an hour.
He would always listen. He was always patient. He was always very, very humble.
He touched so many people individually.
When I saw him interrelate with employees and with members, Bob was always a class act.
That quality that he had to inspire people and get them to work harder for him than they would for themselves, that was pretty amazing.
Time's running out to get your free running suit from European Health Spas. So run in before we run out.
European Health Spas, we want your body, we want your body now!
Dad really gained success at a very young age. I mean, when you think about it, he sold his company at the age of 40.
Health Industries made a very calculated mistake, and they let the old boys go, as they say. They thought they'd create better opportunity for the industry, and it was a huge error.
They're a large conglomerate in the United States, and they felt like they knew how to run business.
I had the opportunity to see that contrast between the new guys move in and the mistakes they made and the consistency which Bob created in the industry. That's why he grew. That's why the business flourished the way it did.
As long as he was running the business and they were staying away, the business did great. he made U.S. industries a lot of money.
When they removed Bob, things just fell apart. It was hard to believe that it could fall apart that fast, but without him there, one thing led to another. The loyalty broke down, and we all left, started our own health clubs.
Health industries failed. Those clubs all closed. He ended up starting clubs again in Hawaii and places where he didn't have a no-compete clause.
When he sold European Health Spas, him and his partner Ken really got involved more with real estate. Probably their most aggressive real estate project was the Banyan Tree Plaza, which was a project located in Honolulu. On the main floor was located the first health club that they had built after European had been sold. It was finished in '75 and is still today one of the most beautiful high-rises on the island.
In the 5 or so decades it's been my privilege to be in this business, Bob was really the innovator. He was the creator. The EOSs and the vases and everything are a follow-up to Bob and his beginnings in this industry.
I don't know that really enough credit has been given to him. We look at our modern day, gym setup with, Planet Fitness and everything else. It really was Bob Rice who was the pioneer of all that.
He set a standard. He was a real pioneer.
He truly studied what it took to be great. I mean, he read the stories of Henry Ford and Woolworth and all the other titans of American industry. And here this little kid from Farmington thought, yeah, I can do this too.
He learned from his mistakes, which is a great lesson for anybody, is they tend to give up. And he didn't. He just kept going, and boy, he made a tremendous success, out of the business that he loved.
We had one home in Olympus Cove, which was a modest home, and then when my dad sold the company to a public company and ran it for a number of years, it kind of propelled us to a different category, and that was pretty cool when you're a little kid.
Well, we built that big house,
The Rice home, or the Rice Palace as we would call it, was so amazing for the time. And what I think of as the Rice home is the doors were flung open.
There's nothing that I enjoy more than to go to a lovely home and be able to just wander around and look at it.
Too many homes in this neighborhood to this day, they're beautiful, but no one goes in them, and people don't know them. And the Rices opened up that home, and we came in and loved it, and it's just so part of their legacy.
Bob always felt like you should help people. He enjoyed that sort of thing, and I did too.
I do remember a private jet. We went on the private jet down to Florida, and that was kind of fun. We went to Disney World when it was brand new, and we'd go down to Lake Powell. It took us a half hour to get to Lake Powell.
Dad was a boater. This guy, I'll tell you what, he was a boater. I don't know where he got the bug.
We had what was called a Chris Craft cruiser on Lake Powell. At the time, these boats were some of the biggest and best that were down there.
The big boat was a great big houseboat. In fact, it was the biggest houseboat on Lake Powell for many years.
We'd go down 4 times a year. We'd go down in the spring, 2 times in the summer, and we'd go down in the fall.
Our family absolutely loved Lake Powell. That was the thing that all of our kids remember. His success allowed that to happen in our family's life, which was great.
We were always invited to go to Lake Powell with our children, and our kids looked forward to it every year. So Lake Powell on their boat was the highlight of our kids' life.
He was the skipper. He had a captain's hat that he would wear. It was, and he really let his hair down there too.
Pac Miller, the famous sports writer, did an article on Dad in the newspaper, and it was Dad skiing from Waweep to Rainbow Bridge, and it was like 50 miles.
And Joyce always fixed beautiful dinners on this houseboat. She would fix amazing meals and feed us all.
And my mom would work like a dog.
I used to cook turkeys down there, just like a Thanksgiving dinner. We always had good food at Lake Powell. And Bob, oh, he loved the big fruit bowls and all kinds of things.
Joyce and Bob had a great marriage. I always watched close because they were the older couple, and they were always great with their kids. And Bob was always great with Joyce.
He treated my mom really, really well.
He treated her like a wife should be treated. He always asked her opinion, and she always gave it. And they treated each other with a lot of respect.
You didn't think about Bob without thinking about Joyce. I mean, they were a tandem, they were a duo.
They were just two really amazing people, and I don't think they get enough credit.
So there's two sets of kids. The older kids, Scott, Bobby, and Jay, are part of the early years. And they remind us of that as much as they can. And then I was born in 1960, and so that's when the three others came along, myself and Mitch and Jill.
They were totally devoted to us as kids.
He had, boats, water skiing. He wanted them to do all kinds of things. Whenever he had time, that's what he was doing.
One thing that I was impressed with him about is he was always so supportive of us as kids and what we were doing.
He was a wonderful father. He's been a wonderful husband. He always said that being a father and a husband was his greatest accomplishment.
This is the story of the American dream and how one man's writings inspired a powerful idea: that freedom, mutual respect, and equality of opportunity are available to all. Since 1947, one organization has upheld the spirit of opportunity: the Horatio Alger Association of Distinguished Americans.
So Horatio Alger Award is given to people who had an upbringing that was poor. So they started from nothing and became something.
Bob Joyce flew into Albany and said, hey, why don't you go with us to New York City, and we're going to the Horatio Alger's Award.
It was really amazing to be sitting there with these people that we had heard of all of our life, and to have Bob, our own brother Bob, amongst them. It was to the moon.
But Bob didn't have the ego that went along with that stuff. He didn't. And that made it really neat.
He was called to serve on the President's Council of Physical Fitness for President Nixon and for President Ford.
Being on the President's Council of Physical Fitness was huge.
For him to have that recognition really meant that he was something in the health fitness business.
Well, I kind of grew up at the old Ute Stadium, and it was kind of a ragtag, sort of put together, 2x4s nailed here. I mean, the Utes, love them as we did, were the laughing stock of then the WAC conference.
But Dad just embraced University of Utah athletics. When he gets on something, he is all in.
He loved the athletic program up there, and it was something that he could contribute to. and he saw a need.
I was attending the U when he made his donation. It was a big deal. I mean, everyone goes, "You related to that guy, Rice guy?" And it makes you proud to say, "Yeah, he's my dad."
$1 million, that was something that was very special. And oh, were we proud of that stadium.
It doesn't seem like it is today, but back in those days when he gave that money, it was huge. It was a huge amount of money.
All of that happened while I was on my mission. And they would send me like these paper clippings in the mail that Bob Rice gives $1 million to the university, and I thought, holy cow.
When we found out that he gave that money to the University of Utah, we were a little bit astounded.
5'7" Randy Gomez.
They put in the scholarship box, also the lights, unheard of, lights play at night, and then the scoreboard. But that was a tremendous effort and a big gift at the time.
The Rice family, and Bob in particular, was instrumental in the development of the Utah athletic program and the football program in particular.
From Rice Stadium on the University of Utah campus, this is WAC Football. Hi everybody, Michael Dunn here to bring you the play-by-play of what should be an excellent football game. These two teams.
The first time I came here was 1976. I was an assistant coach, and that's when I first got to know Bob. And Bob was, everything was Utah.
Because they were kind of not that good, I don't know if he had this inner drive to make them better.
I think in a way, Utah football was a very apt metaphor for Bob Rice's life. It was kind of the little engine that thought it could but never could quite get over the mountain, and I think that's what endeared it so much to Bob Rice. You know, he saw the opportunity of a rags to riches story. Like it was the proverbial doormat and just getting kicked around by everyone, and especially the Cougars in those days.
Running play, Stacy Corley opening into the secondary, spins away, here he goes! He's out of the 40, it's a foot race, he's to midfield, he's to the 40, he's to the 30, and he cuts back inside, he's gonna go all the way!
We were like their stepchild. But the idea was, you know, we need to change that.
And I think what Bob saw is potential.
And he wasn't afraid to step out front and help.
BYU with the football to open the game then, first and 10.
So in 1989, Utah played BYU in Provo in a game that would forever change the history of this rivalry.
And it'll be a touchdown.
It was just such a humiliation.
The football game is over. The final is Brigham Young 70, and Utah has 31.
And that's when they decided to fire Jim Fossil. Bob called me and said, "Are you interested in the job?" I said, "Absolutely."
This is the job I've always wanted. This is Utah's football team, and I'm your football coach. And I appreciate the people that have had faith in me.
It changed my life, obviously, and it changed the fortunes of Utah football. Without Bob Rice, none of it would have happened.
Bob Rice believed in Utah football. He saw something really special there.
He wanted his university to be well represented.
He allowed Utah fans to believe. It wasn't just a pipe dream at that point. It is, we can be good and we can compete with the best.
He just loved football so much, and it was very important to our whole family.
Never missed a game. We would schedule our lives, our travel, everything around those games that happened on Saturday.
He bled red through and through.
More than just donating money, Bob absolutely poured his heart and soul into the Utah program.
He was always there when you had a problem, when you needed something. And the only thing he wanted to do is he wanted to put a good, tough football team on the field.
He was just a tremendous ally for our university.
He saw how invested the community was in the University of Utah, and he thought this is a great thing. It brings the community together.
McCoy steps into the pocket, guns it over the middle, the ball is caught at the 40. Here comes Lusk running.
He had a grandson played quarterback for him.
Starting quarterback of the year, redshirt freshman from Salt Lake City, Lance Wright.
Lance started a lot of games for us and was very successful.
In the middle 90s, the George Eccles Foundation made a major gift for expansion of the stadium for our successful bid in '95 to have the 2002 Winter Olympics, and they talked with Bob. We agreed to make it the Rice-Eccles Stadium. We were just Utes together. That's the truth of it. And we still are. We believe in them.
It took less than 1 year for Rice Stadium to go from this to this to this. It's opening day at the new Rice-Eccles Stadium.
And we're honored to have the Eccles name backing up the Rice name. To know that that's something that gets broadcast all over the country.
Rice-Eccles Stadium in Salt Lake City, capacity listed.
I just hope Bob is continuing to have the pride of what it was that he and Joyce did.
Well, you know, when the season began, Utah was one of the longest of shots to crash the BCS party. They didn't crash it, they kicked the door down.
When Urban Meyer left the university here, I had a decision to make on, job situation and to stay here at Utah or to move on. And other than my immediate family, Bob was the biggest influence in me making that decision. And just grateful for him.
The Utah Utes are going to win a school record 13th game of the season, their 14th win overall, longest streak in the nation, 8 consecutive bowl wins, longest streak in the nation.
Utah just about ready to put the ribbon and wrapping paper on a 9th straight win against BYU, and look what they've done.
Bob Rice was really the catalyst for the modern day success of the University of Utah football program.
His support, his generosity put Utah football on the map, and I don't believe that we would be where we are today without the support and the assistance of Bob and his family.
Brown straight back, and it's picked off. It's Lloyd, headed for the end zone. Pick 6, Devin Lloyd.
Pasadena dreams will be realized for the Utah Utes. Headed to the Rose Bowl for the first time in program history, emphatic champions of the Pac-12.
For many, this is the realization of a lifelong dream, especially those on the Utah side. Utes here for the first time. No doubt as to the inspiration of these Utah Utes. They are underdogs again. They are used to that, but the Pac-12 champions bludgeoned Oregon.
Bob and I have always had the attitude about giving is that it's important, and the Lord tells us how important it is to share what we have. We have donated everywhere we possibly can because it's important, it's good for you.
They really donated a lot to the hospital up there, the University of Utah Hospital and things like that.
I was up one time playing golf in Driggs, Idaho, on Huntsman Springs. Just so happened that John Huntsman was there and with Karen. John said to me, your dad had more influence on the giving and the contributions in Salt Lake City or Utah than anybody by far. It's funny coming from John Huntsman, who's given millions and millions and millions of dollars. But he says, that one act by your dad really brought a lot of guys in the community around to giving.
I heard him say, I'm taking it on myself to encourage other people that have the money to get in and do what I'm doing.
And Bob and Joyce just had an element of elegance, and they were so well known. But the piece that was so amazing to me is that as a couple, they just showed up at places, and they knew people, and they connected, and they cared. They just set an example for so many others to follow. And I would just say they've really together been just such pioneers of giving back and not just using things for your own gain, but using them to leave the world a better place.
One of the real pivotal things that happened in my dad's life was when we lived in Houston. He really caught the vision of how important religion was in a family's life. Up until that time, he was just totally focused on the material part of life.
He didn't have an upbringing of church.
They really didn't have religion in their house.
We didn't go to church. I didn't, Dad wouldn't, and Mom says, I'm not gonna go alone.
He was baptized because his home teacher took him to be baptized. My folks were always active in the church. I think he really looked up to my father.
They had been married in the temple a few years after they were married civilly, but according to my dad, it just never really took. That was just kind of something to make my mom and her parents happy.
It took about 10 years for him to realize that that's where he needed to be. And the first Sunday that we went to church there in Houston, this little lady from Louisiana came up to us, and she just wrapped her arms around us. She said, "Do you have any idea how badly you are needed here?" And that makes all the difference.
I remember the change because I remember the coffee, I think, stopped. And I remember going to church. I remember thinking, God, this is new.
He decided, this is where I need to be, and this is where I want to bring up my family, is in the church.
The gospel touched his heart, ultimately, is what happened.
He realized that if he were to devote himself to religion as much as he did to business, that the religion part would enhance the business side.
Mom was just really proud of him, and she'd be bragging to her sisters. Bob, he goes to church all the time now, and he's going to be a bishop someday. And I thought, that's not going to happen. He swears way too much.
When he took on something and it was important to him, he went all the way in. And when it came to the church, he was all in.
From then on, he absolutely loved the church and everything to do with it.
Well, I don't think Bob's story in the church is really sort of a Saul to Paul metamorphosis, because he was a great human, he was a good person. But I think what it did is it energized him. He realized that he had some missed years to make up for. And he just had such a fervent testimony.
He was a ward missionary and stake missionary a couple of times and just absolutely loved that.
He soon became, called as a bishop fairly young.
We moved to Salt Lake in 1962, in the Olympus Hills area. Bob was bishop, and here was a leader that just was so humble. You'd never know that he'd attained the kinds of things he'd attained in life.
And he became stake president.
President Rice had probably more influence on me as a church leader than any other church leader I've ever had.
He had a strong testimony of the gospel of Jesus Christ, and he expressed that often. He couldn't help but influence all of us for good, and those traits that we saw in him, we tried to emulate.
all those callings were important to him, but I remember the most important calling that he ever had that he said, and that was being a sealer in the temple. He would actually have an assignment on Wednesday morning, and I think he became supervisor. And he would go to Hawaii with Mom, and he would catch the red eye and be back on Wednesday morning at 6 a.m. to fulfill his assignment in the temple.
You know, his whole life was built around the gospel.
He got to the point where he realized that it just meant everything.
Part of that, I think, was, again, his desire to do everything he had in his remaining years on this earth to just make sure that he could serve God.
He never really preached a lot. He just did it.
I never was a member of the church. Bob tried to explain to me the finer points of the ecclesiastical lack in my life. And he kept working on it, you know. But that was a big change, and Bob, I'm sure, and Joyce is, thrilled that I've seen the light. It's a great thrill. My baptism, I'm sure that he's thrilled about it and takes full credit for it. And I think he ought to.
I don't know what would have happened to all of us if my dad hadn't embraced the gospel. Life would have been way different for all of us.
He might not have spent the first part of his life in the church, but I'll tell you what, he lived 9, 10, 11 lifetimes in terms of what he was able to give back and his impact on a lot of people.
The thing that I'll always remember most about Bob Rice is that he was just a humble, kind man. And you couldn't help but take note of the relationship between him and Joyce. I mean, you could just tell that they loved each other.
I'm so grateful for the gospel, because if I keep up my end of the bargain, we'll be together.
He gathered all of us together when he was 77 years old. He called a meeting, a family meeting, and that wasn't something that was really normal. So we all met, and that's when he broke the news that he had this diagnosis of cancer.
We were shocked because Bob was in such great physical condition when he was diagnosed with multiple myeloma.
At the time, you just felt like, well, this is something that he'll get treatment for. He'll just beat it, and we'll have life as normal after.
But he had a great attitude about it, and he said, you know, I'm going to beat this.
He wanted to live as much as any human being that's ever been on this earth.
He was told at the time, and he shared with us, he says, you know, they're saying 3 or 4 years, you know, and we thought, oh, goodness gracious, you know, that can't be. Certainly that isn't going to happen to our dad. But, you know, at the end of the day, that was pretty much about how long he got. He got maybe 4 or 5 years, I think, and it just finally overtook him.
I have really, really, really missed him, and I'm still missing him.
I've met a lot of really famous people in my life. I've met a lot of really wealthy people in my life. I've met a lot of great humanitarians in my life. I've never met anyone like Bob Rice.
Bob was somebody that very important in my life. He was my friend.
He was always very honest with everybody. He was very open and approachable with everybody.
He was down to earth, and he knew where he'd come from.
The quality of the man, the consistency of the man, the dependability of the man.
He really had a sense of humor. Yeah, he was just so much fun to be around.
When you were around Bob, it made you a positive person.
Bob was a dreamer and a doer. He believed and he put in the work.
His legacy, I never want to taint that. You know, he worked too hard.
They gave us a pattern for how to raise a family, how to live in a community, how to live the gospel and include everyone.
He was loving and giving and outward focused and just had such a sense of purpose in his life.
If I can be, in some small way, the same example that he was to us, that I could be to my family, that would be all that I could hope for in my life.